everything happens somewhere. And the somewhere where we're at is Sebaste. It is part of Samaria. So let me give you a little bit of data, and then we'll get to the story. Israel came in under Joshua. They took the land. And under the great King David, the man after God's own heart, Israel was unified for the first time. And after the mismanagement of Solomon, his son, Israel would be fractured. And it wouldn't be reunified again until the true Son of David comes, Jesus, who will unify God's people, Jew and Gentile. He'll unify them in such a way that those distinctives that used to separate us would no longer do so. But this is long before Jesus. And God's people would drift away from God. And they would drift away from God in such a way that the kingdom broke apart. And sometimes it's confusing for folks, but the north would take upon itself the name Israel, and the south would take upon the name Judah. Well, in 722, because of the sins of the people of Israel, the northern kingdom, God raised up the Assyrians. The Assyrians came through and they defeated the people of Israel, the people of the north. And it was the Assyrian way of dealing by taking people and mixing up other people with them. And so the people of the north became, as it were, genetically mixed. At the time, half-breeds. In time, Judah would fall and go into Babylonian exile. They would return, and in returning, they would attempt to build the temple of God, then the walls of the city, and all the while, there was tension, and that's an understatement, between those of the south and those of the north. Well, that tension continued, and then about 322 BC, Alexander the Great comes through. He comes through this region, and he makes this city his capital city. Then, as time would have it, about 128 BC, the Jews launched an attack on this place called Samaria, the Samaritans, and wreaked havoc. The Samaritans returned the favor in 6 AD by bringing all kinds of bones and entrails into the temple, contaminating it. I share that with you so that you can understand the tension and the animosity between those in the south and those in the north. They're Samaritans. Now, the Jews had no love for the Romans. They were oppressors. They were brutes. They were brutish. They were oppressive. But the Samaritans were repulsive. It is no small thing that when Jesus is asked, "Who is my neighbor?" that he lifts up a Samaritan as an example of an honorable person and saying, "Who is neighbor?" Well, everything happens somewhere, and the story I'm going to tell you didn't happen here. We're in Sebaste, the capital that Herod established in 27 BC. He called it Sebaste, which is Greek for Augustus. That's Latin for Augustus. Named the city after Caesar. And it didn't happen here, but the way John tells it in the 4th chapter of his gospel, he begins John chapter 4 with these words: Jesus had to go through Samaria. Now I read those words, and I've been here a time or two in the land, and I know he didn't have to go through Samaria. He could have gone down Wadi Kelt, the Jericho Road, into the Jordan Valley, turned left, north, go along the Jordan Valley until he hits the Beit Shan Valley, which is part of the Jezreel Valley. And he could have taken a road along the side of that valley up to Nazareth on the north side of the Jezreel Valley. He could have also gone through the Megiddo Pass, along the coastal plain, along Via Maris, and taken maybe the Ilon Valley from Gezer up to the Benjamin Plateau. I mean, there's a number of ways that Jesus could have gone. He didn't have to go through Samaria. And then, when I looked at the Greek, Jesus had to go through Samaria. And I looked at the word for through. And the Greek word for through is dierchomai. Now that is an interesting word. Because in order to get to our kitchen in our home, you have to go through the dining room. But that's not the sense of this word. The sense of this word is to go through as to go all about, to spread yourself. Jesus had to spread himself through Samaria. And when he got to the well, he was tired. And I think he was tired because he was spreading himself through Samaria, seeking to encounter someone. And so, the text says he sat by the well. Again, the Greek helps me because the word for sitting by the well is epi. And in Greek, epi means sits on the well. He sits on that stone-covered well. Now it's the 6th hour, and he's tired. He's been spreading himself through Samaria, going here and there, and now on the 6th hour, he comes to the well. And here she comes. She has about 5 or 6 children at home, each looking very different from each other. She comes to the well at a time when women don't come to the well. And that's exactly why she comes. She comes to the well and she encounters this man sitting on the stone. And he says to her, "Give me a drink." She responds, "You, a Jew, talk to me? Give me a drink." Which, a little bit of backstory, is an interesting thing for Jesus to ask for. Because this is the one who could feed thousands of people with 2 fish and 5 loaves. This is the one who could change water into wine. But you see, he had to go through Samaria. And he sits on the source of water and says to her, "Give me a drink." Well, they get involved in the conversation. And in that conversation, they talk about things like living water. They talk about places to worship. And in that conversation, there is a growing awareness on her part. Because at the beginning of the conversation, she says, "You Jew." After a few words, "Sir." And at the end, "Messiah." In that conversation, Jesus says to her, "Why don't you go and get your husband?" She says, "I have no husband." Jesus says, "You're right. You've had 5. And the man you're living with now is not your husband." I wonder if she'd had anybody talk to her in such an assertive yet loving way. Because in his voice was an awareness of her situation. Because you see, at that time, women didn't divorce their husbands. Husbands divorced their wives. She'd known the beds of 5 men. She'd been rejected by 5 men. And this one that she's living with now doesn't even bother to marry her. There was something in his voice something in his words that spoke the truth in love. And there's a healing going on. And she runs back to her town. And she doesn't bring the water jug that she came to get the water in. She runs back to town, beckoning everyone to come. Come. You've got to meet him. Now, my friends, I don't want you to miss the math in this story. She had 5 husbands. She's living with a 6th man, which makes the relationship with Jesus the 7th. And in that relationship, my friends, she can rest. He will never leave. He will never forsake. This is one in whom she might trust. And out of that trust is faith birthed. Jesus had to go through Samaria and sit on that well, I think, because he sensed from the Heavenly Father there was one lost sheep. You've got to go and find her. You've got to let her know how much I love her. And with me, she can rest. Everything happens somewhere. And the somewhere where you and I are is Samaria. Despised by the Jews, passionately loved by Jesus.